Man shouted at a poor waiter, slamming his fist on the counter as customers watched in uncomfortable silence. The waiter stood frozen, whispering apologies he didn't owe, while the man's anger grew louder. Sharper, crueler, but then, without warning, the diner's door creaked open. No voices, no chatter, just the heavy sound of boots on tile. A group of bikers walked in silent, steady, and staring straight at the man, ready to end his outburst in a way that made the entire diner hold its breath. The first rays of dawn painted the windows of Mel's diner in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the checkered linoleum floor. Steam rose from fresh coffee pots behind the counter, mixing with the comforting aroma of bacon sizzling on the griddle. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the small town establishment was beginning to stir with the quiet rhythm of another day. Behind the counter, 22-year-old Danny wiped down already spotless surfaces with the dedication of someone who took pride in honest work. His uniform was clean but worn, patched in places where seams had given way to countless shifts. The name tag pinned to his chest had seen better days, but his smile remained genuine as he prepared for the morning rush. Danny had been working at Mel's for 3 years now, saving every penny he could for college tuition while supporting his sick mother at home. The bell above the door chimed softly as the first customers of the day began to trickle in, construction workers grabbing coffee before their shifts, an elderly couple sharing their usual breakfast, a few truck drivers stretching their legs during long hauls. Danny knew most of them by name, remembered their orders, asked about their families. This was more than just a job to him. It was his way of serving his community with dignity. As he refilled the sugar dispensers, Danny couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this particular morning. The air seemed charged with an energy he couldn't quite identify, as if the universe was holding its breath before something significant happened. Little did he know that in just a few hours, his faith in human decency would be tested in ways he never imagined, and restored by protectors he never expected to find in the quiet corner booth of Mel's diner. The morning sun climbed higher, painting everything in that golden hour light that photographers dream of, completely unaware that it was about to illuminate one of the most important lessons about respect and dignity this small town had ever witnessed. The peaceful morning atmosphere shattered like glass when Richard Hartwell burst through the diner's front door at exactly 7:15. Everything about him screamed entitlement, from his expensive suit that cost more than Danny made in 2 months, to the way he snapped his fingers impatiently while scanning the room for a table. His BMW sat outside with its engine still running, hazard lights blinking as if the world should accommodate his every convenience. "Table for one." He barked at Danny, not bothering with pleasantries or even eye contact. "And make it fast. I've got important business to attend to." Danny smiled politely and led him to a booth near the window. The vinyl seats cracked from years of use, but clean and comfortable. As he placed the menu down, Richard's face twisted with disgust at the humble surroundings. The faded photographs of local high school sports teams, the handwritten daily specials board, the simple charm of a place that had served the community for 30 years. "Coffee, black, and I want eggs over easy bacon crispy wheat toast dry. Don't mess it up," Richard commanded, tossing the menu aside without even looking at it. His voice carried the arrogance of someone who believed his money made him superior to everyone around him. Danny nodded respectfully and hurried to the kitchen, but fate had other plans. As he returned with the steaming mug of coffee, his worn sneaker caught a nearly invisible patch of grease on the floor. Time seemed to slow as Danny stumbled, the coffee cup tilting dangerously before splashing a few drops onto Richard's pristine white cuff. The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation in the diner stopped as Richard's face turned a dangerous shade of red, his eyes blazing with the fury of someone whose perfect world had been disrupted by what he saw as incompetence. "You worthless piece of trash," Richard's voice exploded across the diner like a thunderclap. "Look what you've done to my shirt. This cost more than you make in a week. You pathetic excuse for a waiter." Danny's face burned with shame as he quickly grabbed napkins, apologizing profusely while trying to help clean the tiny stain. But Richard wasn't finished. He stood up, towering over the young man, his voice growing louder and more vicious with each word. "This is exactly what's wrong with people like you," he snarled, his finger jabbing accusingly at Danny's chest. "No education, no class, no respect for your betters. You're nothing but a worthless servant who can't even do the simplest job without screwing it up." The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision, designed to humiliate and destroy. Other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some staring at their plates, others shooting sympathetic glances toward Danny. But no one moved to intervene. Fear of confrontation, of making things worse, kept them frozen in their seats as Richard's verbal assault continued with increasing brutality. The diner had become a theater of cruelty, with Richard as the villain and Danny as his unwilling victim. The other patrons sat in uncomfortable silence, their breakfasts growing cold as they witnessed the systematic destruction of a young man's dignity. Some looked away entirely, unable to watch, but equally unable to act. The elderly couple by the window whispered urgently to each other. The construction workers clenched their fists but remained seated, and even Mel himself seemed paralyzed by the sheer audacity of Richard's attack. But in the corner booth, shrouded in shadow and morning light filtering through Venetian blinds, sat 5 figures who had been quietly observing everything. They were bikers, their leather jackets draped over the backs of their chairs, their coffee cups barely touched as they watched the scene unfold with growing intensity. These weren't the stereotypical outlaws of Hollywood fiction. They were working men and women, veterans and mechanics, teachers and fathers, united by a brotherhood that valued honor above all else. The leader, a gray-haired man named Frank, with eyes that had seen too much injustice in his 60 years, slowly set down his coffee cup. The sound was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a decision being made. Beside him, Maria, a nurse who rode a Harley on weekends, felt her jaw tighten as Richard's tirade continued. Tom, a retired Marine, found his hands clenching involuntarily. Sarah, a high school principal, and Jake, a construction foreman, exchanged meaningful glances. They had come to Mel's for their weekly breakfast ride, a tradition that brought them together to share stories and maintain the bonds of brotherhood that stretched far beyond their love of motorcycles. But now they found themselves witnesses to something that violated every principle they held sacred: the strong preying upon the weak, cruelty masquerading as superiority, and a community too afraid to stand up for what was right. Richard's voice reached a crescendo of hatred, his words echoing off the diner's walls like poison. "People like you are why this country is falling apart. You're worthless. Do you hear me? Worthless." Danny stood there, trembling not with fear, but with the effort of maintaining his composure, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of humiliation and rage. He had endured enough cruelty in his young life, the taunts about his second-hand clothes, the whispers about his family's poverty, the constant struggle to maintain dignity in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. But in that corner booth, something powerful was stirring. 5 chairs scraped against the floor in perfect unison, the sound cutting through Richard's rant like a blade through silk. The transformation was immediate and absolute. 5 figures rose from the corner booth with the coordinated precision of a military unit, their movement so fluid and purposeful that it seemed choreographed by fate itself. Frank, the gray-haired leader, stood first, his weathered hands resting calmly at his sides, his presence filling the room like gathering storm clouds. One by one, his brothers and sisters in arms joined him, Maria, Tom, Sarah, and Jake, forming a line of quiet authority that commanded instant attention. They didn't rush or storm across the diner like movie heroes bursting into action. Instead, they walked with the measured pace of people who understood that true power didn't need to announce itself with noise or drama. Their boots made soft, rhythmic sounds against the linoleum floor, each step deliberate and meaningful. The leather of their jackets creaked softly as they moved, and the patches on their backs told stories of military service, charitable rides, and a brotherhood forged in loyalty and mutual respect. Richard, mid-sentence in another vicious attack on Danny's character, suddenly found his voice caught in his throat as he became aware of the approaching figures. His head turned slowly, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of 5 bikers walking toward him with expressions that could have been carved from stone. The expensive suit that had made him feel so superior moments earlier now seemed like tissue paper armor against the moral weight bearing down on him. "Gentlemen, ladies," Richard stammered, his voice cracking as his earlier bravado evaporated like morning mist. There was a problem with the service." Frank stopped 3 feet away from Richard, close enough to be clearly understood but far enough to avoid any appearance of physical intimidation. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of honorable living rather than demanding it through money and status. "We heard," Frank said simply, his gray eyes never leaving Richard's face. The whole diner heard. The silence that followed was profound, not the uncomfortable quiet of people afraid to intervene, but the focused attention of a community finally seeing justice arrive in the most unexpected form. Richard looked around desperately, searching for support, sympathy, or even just a friendly face, but found only the steady gazes of people who had watched him reveal his true character and found it wanting. Behind the bikers, Danny stood transfixed, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. These strangers, people he had served coffee to dozens of times but barely knew, had risen to defend him when no one else would. What happened next would be remembered in the annals of Mel's Diner for generations to come. Frank stepped slightly closer to Richard, not with aggression but with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down real monsters, and found a schoolyard bully lacking in comparison. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "Son," Frank began, his tone surprisingly gentle despite the steel beneath it, "I've been coming to this diner for 15 years. I've watched Danny work here since he was barely out of high school. He's put himself through community college while supporting his sick mother. He's never missed a shift, never given anyone less than his best effort, and he treats every customer with more respect than they deserve." Richard's face had gone pale, his earlier bluster replaced by the dawning realization that he was facing something far more formidable than he had bargained for. These weren't the stereotypical bikers of his prejudiced imagination. These were pillars of the community, people whose respect mattered more than his money ever could. Maria stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 20 years nursing people back to health. What we just witnessed wasn't a man addressing poor service. It was a coward taking his own failures out on someone who couldn't fight back. Tom, the retired Marine, added his voice to the chorus of quiet condemnation. "In the service, we had a saying, you can judge a man's character by how he treats people who have nothing to offer him. Today, you showed us exactly who you are." The power dynamic in the room had completely reversed. Richard, who had entered the diner believing his wealth made him superior to everyone present, now found himself exposed as the smallest person in the room. His expensive suit couldn't protect him from the weight of their combined moral authority, and his money meant nothing in the face of their united front. "I want you to think about something," Frank continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. "Danny here, he's working 2 jobs to pay for school and help his family. He gets up every morning and chooses to serve others with dignity and respect. What did you choose to do this morning?" Sarah, the high school principal, delivered the final blow with the precision of someone who had spent decades teaching young people about character and consequences. True strength isn't measured by how loud you can yell or how much money you can spend. It's measured by how you lift others up, not tear them down. Richard looked around the room one final time, seeing his reflection in the eyes of every person present. Not the successful businessman he imagined himself to be, but a petty tyrant whose cruelty had finally met its match. Without another word, he threw a $20 bill on the table and fled toward the door, his expensive shoes clicking rapidly against the floor in his haste to escape the judgment he had brought upon himself. As the door slammed behind him, the diner seemed to exhale collectively, tension draining away like water through a broken dam. Frank turned to Danny, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. "You okay, son?" Danny nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "All of you, I I don't know what to say. I don't need to say anything, Jake replied with a grin. Just keep being the good man you are. The world needs more people like you. The atmosphere in Mel's diner had been transformed completely. Where moments before there had been tension and the bitter taste of injustice, now there was something different. A sense of community, of people who had witnessed something important and been reminded of what really mattered. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, more thoughtful, as if everyone present understood they had been part of something significant. The 5 bikers returned to their corner booth as calmly as they had risen from it, picking up their coffee cups and resuming their breakfast as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Danny couldn't let the moment pass without proper acknowledgement. He approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee, his hands steady now, his dignity restored. "Breakfast is on the house," he said, his voice stronger than it had been all morning. "It's the least I can do." Frank looked up at him with eyes that twinkled with warmth. "Son, we pay for our meals just like everyone else. That's how respect works. It goes both ways." As the morning progressed and the story spread throughout the small town, people began to understand something important about strength and courage. It wasn't about size or volume, or the ability to intimidate others. True strength was quiet, purposeful, and always stood on the side of what was right. The bikers had shown everyone present that heroes don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they simply rise from a corner booth when justice calls. Danny finished his shift that day with his head held high, knowing that he was part of a community that would stand up for its own when it mattered most. And in the corner booth, 5 friends finished their breakfast and prepared for another ride, carrying with them the satisfaction that comes from doing what's right simply because it needs to be done. The bell above the door chimed softly as they left, but their lesson lingered in the warm air of Mel's diner, a reminder that in a world that often feels cold and uncaring, there are still people willing to stand up for those who need protection most. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones that don't need to be shouted. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who speak in whispers. And sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones sitting quietly in corner booths, watching, waiting, and ready to stand up when justice calls their name. Danny's story reminds us that dignity isn't something that can be taken away by cruel words or thoughtless actions. It's something we carry within ourselves, protected by those who understand what it means to treat others with respect. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness and courage still exist in this world, then share it with someone who needs to remember that they're not alone. Hit that like button if you believe that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the quiet heroes among us. And let us know in the comments about a time when someone stood up for you, when you needed it most. Because at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to make our way in this world, and we're stronger when we stand together.